Opening. The doctoral ceremony nobody attended. The morning of my doctoral graduation, I sat alone in my cap and gown in the university's grand auditorium, watching families fill the seats around me while my phone remained silent. I'd sent the invitation 3 months ago. I'd reminded them 2 weeks prior. I'd even offered to pay for their hotel rooms. But my family had scheduling conflicts. Mom was getting her nails done for her book club's wine tasting. Dad had a golf tournament he couldn't miss at the country club. My brother Marcus was studying for his medical school finals, which apparently took precedence over everything else in our family's universe. "It's just another degree, sweetie," Mom had said when I called that morning, hoping they'd change their minds. "You've been in school forever. We'll celebrate when you get a real job." A real job. As if the past 6 years of doctoral research in oncology at Johns Hopkins meant nothing. As if the groundbreaking work I'd been doing on targeted cancer therapies was just an extended hobby. I was 28 years old, about to receive my PhD in molecular biology with a focus on cancer research, and my family treated it like I was collecting participation trophies. Meanwhile, every time Marcus passed a medical school exam, we had family dinners to celebrate his brilliant future as a surgeon. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Professors filed in wearing their colorful academic regalia while families cheered for their graduates. I watched other students embrace their parents, pose for photos, and share moments of pride that I'd only imagined. When they called my name, Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Chin, PhD in molecular biology, summa cum laude, I walked across that stage to polite applause from strangers. My research advisor, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, shook my hand with genuine warmth. "Your work is going to change lives, Sarah," she whispered as she handed me my diploma. "Your family should be incredibly proud." I smiled and nodded, but inside I felt the familiar ache of being undervalued by the people who were supposed to matter most. Dr. Martinez didn't know that my family had skipped my graduation to attend Marcus's medical school study group party the same afternoon. After the ceremony, I stood outside the auditorium watching other families take photos and make dinner plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How was your thing? We're at Delancey's celebrating my clinical skills exam. You should come by later if you want." My thing. 6 years of research into novel cancer treatments, and he called it my thing. I drove home to my small apartment near the university, still wearing my graduation gown, and sat down at my computer to review the research data I'd been analyzing for months. Tomorrow, I was scheduled to present my findings to the National Cancer Institute's review board. My dissertation research had yielded something extraordinary, a targeted therapy that could potentially revolutionize treatment for aggressive pancreatic cancer. But my family didn't know about the NCI presentation. They didn't know about the preliminary results that had my research team working 18-hour days. They didn't know that pharmaceutical companies had been quietly reaching out about potential partnerships. They saw me as the perpetual student who couldn't finish school and get on with real life, while Marcus was the golden child destined for medical greatness. The irony was that my research might actually save more lives than any surgery Marcus would ever perform, but in their minds an MD was prestigious while a PhD was just more school. Build up. The family dinner dismissal. 2 days after my graduation, we had our monthly family dinner at Mom and Dad's house. I arrived to find them in the middle of planning Marcus's graduation party for next year, a celebration that would apparently include rented tents, catered food, and invitations to every family friend and colleague Dad had ever met. "Sarah, how was your little ceremony?" Mom asked, not looking up from her party planning spreadsheets. "I'm sorry we missed it, but you understand how busy everyone gets." "It was fine," I said, taking my usual seat at the dining room table. "Dr. Martinez said some nice things about my research." "That's wonderful, dear," Dad said absently, reviewing catering menus. "Marcus, tell Sarah about your surgery rotation. The stories he has are incredible." And just like that, the conversation shifted to Marcus's latest adventures in medical school. How he'd assisted with a heart surgery. How his attending physician had praised his suturing technique. How everyone said he had natural surgical instincts. I listened to 30 minutes of Marcus's medical school highlights while my own achievement, 6 years of rigorous research culminating in a doctoral degree, was treated like a minor inconvenience that had delayed the real conversation. "Sarah's planning to find a real job now, aren't you, sweetie?" Mom said during a brief lull in the Marcus appreciation session. Maybe something in pharmaceutical sales? I hear they pay well and you could use your science background. Pharmaceutical sales. As if I'd spent 6 years earning a PhD to become a sales representative. Actually, I'm continuing my research, I said. I have a position at the university, and I'm presenting my findings to the National Cancer Institute next week. The National Cancer Institute? Marcus perked up with sudden interest. That's pretty impressive, Sarah. What kind of research are you doing? Finally, someone asking about my work. I've been developing targeted therapies for pancreatic cancer. The preliminary results suggest we might have found a way to significantly improve survival rates. Pancreatic cancer, Dad repeated. That's the really bad one, right? The one that killed your Uncle Robert. Yes, I said, glad to have their attention for once. It's one of the most aggressive cancers, but my research suggests we might be able to target it more effectively than current treatments. Mom waved her hand dismissively. That sounds very complicated, dear. I'm sure it's important work, but when are you going to settle down and start thinking about practical things? You can't live in a laboratory forever. The moment of interest had passed. I was back to being the impractical daughter who needed to grow up and join the real world, while Marcus continued to be the family's shining medical star. Speaking of practical things, Marcus said, I've been invited to join an exclusive surgical society at school. It's only for the top students and they're already talking about fast-tracking me into a cardiac surgery residency. And we were back to the Marcus show. I excused myself early, claiming I had work to do, which wasn't entirely false. The NCI presentation was in 5 days and I wanted to review my data one more time. But mostly I needed to escape the suffocating feeling of being invisible in my own family. That night, I worked until 3 a.m. fine-tuning the presentation that could potentially change cancer treatment forever. My research had identified a novel protein pathway that allowed pancreatic cancer cells to resist conventional chemotherapy. More importantly, I'd developed a targeted inhibitor that could block this pathway, making the cancer cells vulnerable to treatment. The preliminary results were extraordinary. In laboratory studies, my targeted therapy had increased survival rates by 340% compared to current standard treatments. If the human trials bore out these results, we could transform pancreatic cancer from a death sentence to a manageable disease. But my family was too busy planning Marcus's future graduation party to care about any of that. Revelation: when the world takes notice. The National Cancer Institute presentation went better than I'd dared to hope. The review board was stunned by my findings. Dr. Patricia Williams, the NCI's Director of Oncology Research, called my work potentially paradigm-shifting and fast-tracked it for expanded clinical trials. Within 48 hours, I was fielding calls from major pharmaceutical companies interested in licensing my research. The university's technology transfer office was calculating potential patent values in the hundreds of millions. Medical journals were requesting expedited publication of my findings. But I hadn't told my family about any of this. After years of having my work dismissed and minimized, I'd learned to keep my professional victories private. It was easier than watching them find ways to diminish my achievements or redirect attention to Marcus's latest medical school triumph. That changed on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the NCI presentation. I was in my laboratory reviewing data from the accelerated clinical trials when my research assistant burst through the door. Dr. Chin, you need to see this, she said, holding up her phone. CNN is running a breaking news story about your research. I stared at her phone screen in shock. There was my photograph, my university ID photo, next to a headline that read, Johns Hopkins researchers' breakthrough could transform pancreatic cancer treatment. The story was everywhere. CNN, Fox News, BBC, Reuters, Associated Press. Social media was exploding with shares and comments. The university's communications office was fielding interview requests from major networks and international news organizations. My phone started ringing immediately. Reporters, colleagues, family, friends who'd somehow gotten my number. But the call that surprised me most came from Marcus. Sarah, what the hell is going on? He said, his voice strained. My classmates are calling me asking if you're really my sister. They're saying you might have cured pancreatic cancer. I haven't cured anything yet, I said carefully. But the research looks promising. Promising? Sarah, this is on every major news network. They're calling it a potential breakthrough in cancer treatment. How did you not mention this? Before I could answer, my phone beeped with another call. Then another. Text messages were flooding in from colleagues, friends, and relatives I hadn't heard from in years. The one that made my heart race was from Mom. Sarah, people are calling asking about you and cancer research. What's happening? 20 minutes later, my entire family was calling in a conference call that Dad had hastily organized. Sarah, explain this to us, Dad demanded. Mrs. Henderson just called saying she saw you on the news talking about cancer research. She said they're calling you a genius. It's my doctoral research, I said. The work I've been doing for the past 6 years. The research I tried to tell you about at dinner last month. But they're saying you might have found a cure for pancreatic cancer, Mom said, her voice higher than usual. That's not possible, is it? You just got your degree. I've been working on this research for 6 years, Mom. My doctoral dissertation was based on this work. The National Cancer Institute has fast-tracked it for clinical trials. Silence on the line. The National Cancer Institute, Marcus repeated slowly. Sarah, do you realize what this means? If your research works, you could save millions of lives. I told you about the research, I said quietly. At family dinner 3 weeks ago. You changed the subject to talk about Marcus's surgical society. More silence. Dr. Chin. A voice I didn't recognize came on the line. This is Dr. James Peterson from the Washington Post. We're trying to reach you for comment on your cancer research breakthrough. How did you get this number? I asked. Your brother Marcus gave it to us. We're at Johns Hopkins interviewing students about your work. Is it true that your targeted therapy could increase pancreatic cancer survival rates by over 300%? I realized that Marcus, who was supposed to be in class, was apparently at the university talking to reporters about my research. The same research he'd shown minimal interest in 3 weeks earlier. I need to go, I told my family. The university's communications office needs to coordinate all media requests. As I hung up, I realized my phone had 17 missed calls and 43 unread text messages. The university parking lot was full of news vans. My quiet life as a researcher had just become very public. Resolution, recognition, and boundaries. Over the next 48 hours, my story dominated health and science news coverage. Major networks wanted interviews. Medical journals fast-tracked publication of my research. The university organized a press conference where I found myself standing behind a podium, answering questions from journalists around the world. Dr. Chin, how does it feel to potentially revolutionize cancer treatment? Asked a reporter from the BBC. Science is about incremental progress and rigorous testing, I replied. We're optimistic about these preliminary results, but we need to complete clinical trials before making any definitive claims. Your research suggests this therapy could transform pancreatic cancer from a terminal diagnosis to a treatable condition, pressed another journalist. What inspired you to pursue this particular approach? I thought about Uncle Robert, who died from pancreatic cancer when I was in college. I thought about the countless hours in the laboratory, the failed experiments, the moments of breakthrough that had led to this discovery. Personal experience with this disease motivated my research focus, I said. But ultimately, this work represents 6 years of dedicated investigation by an entire research team. After the press conference, I walked across campus to find Marcus waiting by my laboratory. He looked uncomfortable, maybe even ashamed. Sarah, I owe you an apology, he said. I had no idea the scope of what you were doing. When the reporter started asking me about my sister, the cancer researcher, I realized I knew nothing about your actual work. I tried to tell you, I said simply. Multiple times. I know. We all did. We treated your PhD like it was just prolonged education, not real research that could save lives. My phone buzzed with another call from a pharmaceutical company, followed immediately by a text from Mom. Saw you on CNN. We need to talk. The family wants to have dinner to celebrate your achievement, Marcus continued. Dad's talking about renting the country club, inviting everyone we know. Like the graduation party you're planning for yourself? Marcus had the grace to look embarrassed. Yeah, kind of like that. Look, I get why you might not want that. We screwed up, Sarah. We completely failed to recognize what you were accomplishing. Over the following weeks, the attention was overwhelming but also validating. Major pharmaceutical companies competed to license my research. The National Cancer Institute allocated $50 million for expanded clinical trials. Time magazine named me to their Next Generation Leaders list. My family's response was complicated. They were proud, certainly, but also clearly struggling with the reality that the daughter they'd dismissed as a perpetual student was now being hailed as a potential pioneer in cancer research. Mom called daily with updates about neighbors and friends who'd seen me on the news. Dad forwarded every article about my research to his entire email contact list. Marcus found himself fielding questions from classmates who suddenly realized his sister was famous. But the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. I received thousands of emails from cancer patients and families affected by pancreatic cancer. Support letters from fellow researchers. Invitations to speak at medical conferences around the world. 6 months later, when Marcus graduated from medical school, his ceremony was everything my family had planned. Catered dinner, rented venue, hundreds of guests. I was invited, of course, and I attended. But the dynamic had shifted. People at Marcus's graduation party knew who I was. They asked about my research, my clinical trials, my upcoming publications. Marcus, to his credit, introduced me proudly as my sister, the cancer researcher. "How does it feel to have saved so many lives already?" asked one of Dad's colleagues. "The research is still in clinical trials," I corrected. "We won't know the full impact for several years. But the preliminary results suggest you've found something revolutionary," pressed another guest. "Science is about careful validation and peer review," I replied. "Premature claims can be harmful to patients and families." Later that evening, as the party wound down, Mom approached me with something that might have been regret in her eyes. "Sarah, I realize we didn't understand what you were doing all these years. When you said you were doing cancer research, we thought it was just academic work. We didn't realize you were actually trying to save lives. All academic research has practical applications," I said. "You just didn't think mine was worth paying attention to." The truth hung between us, uncomfortable but necessary. "We're proud of you now," she said softly. "You should have been proud of me when I graduated," I replied. The work hadn't changed. Only the recognition had. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how external validation had forced my family to reconsider their assumptions about my life and work. The research that had been dismissed as just another degree was now potentially saving lives on a global scale. But the recognition from the scientific community, from patients, from peers who understood the significance of the work, that had always been there. My family's approval was gratifying, but it was no longer necessary for my sense of worth or purpose. Sometimes the most important work happens quietly in laboratories and libraries, away from the fanfare and celebration. And sometimes, the world eventually takes notice of what your family never bothered to see.